In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
I just love today's gospel. This is really one of the great moments when we get to read this passage on a Sunday. Last week we had the Feast of the Transfiguration because it fell on August 6th, and so that takes precedence over the Sunday. So what we missed was the immediate preceding story that went with this, which is Jesus feeding the 5,000. Right? So he feeds the multitudes, and he takes and blesses and breaks and distributes the bread, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and it's enough to feed 5,000 plus people, right? Because we're told it was 5,000 men, but they didn't count the women and the children. But Jesus didn't worry about counting at all. He had more than enough food for everyone who was there, and that was the important part of the story, right? That the people could be provisioned and nourished and trust in Jesus for feeding them after this period of teaching and healing. And then after this momentous, miraculous moment, Jesus dismisses the crowds and he goes up the mountain to pray, which is a kind of a wonderful moment here in Matthew's gospel. In Luke's gospel, we hear of Jesus slipping off to pray in private all the time. This is actually, we're in Matthew 14 here. This is the first moment in Matthew's gospel where we're told that Jesus went off to pray by himself. So it's a kind of noticeable moment, right? He has just fed the crowds with words that are very similar to the Eucharist, to the institution of the Last Supper, right? The gestures are exactly the same, right? He takes, he blesses, he breaks, he distributes. That's exactly what we're told he does at the Lord's Supper as well. And so there's kind of a Eucharistic connection here. And then he retreats to prayer. He sends the disciples on ahead of him to the other side. Now, in ancient Israel, and through all the stories of ancient Israel, we see the sea and waters as a force of chaos, right? The Israelites were not a seafaring people, even though this particular crew of disciples, we know they had commerce on the sea here. They were fishermen. But in general, the people of Israel saw the water as kind of a dangerous place, right? We just heard in that wonderful hymn, right, the Navy hymn, about moving over the chaos, dark and rude, right? The Spirit of God moves over the kind of chaotic waters at the beginning of creation. And so, we hear a number of stories of this. And the Psalms feed into today's passage, not the one that we had appointed for us, but a number of other ones about God walking across the waters, right? The only one who can calm a stormy sea is God, right? It's not something that people do, not even prophets, right? This is God's domain, right? Calming stormy waters. I've been thinking this week about this story. I don't know if you guys saw it, about this young man who went out in his John boat from St. Augustine and got lost at sea for 30-some hours, right? He probably didn't make the wisest decisions, but don't we all sometimes make foolish decisions and find ourselves in stormy and dangerous places? In the article about him I read, he said he spent a lot of time in that 30 hours having conversations with God, and I can imagine that he did, and he's lucky to be alive. But we've got the disciples on this boat, and the storm comes up, and the words in Greek about the waves being against them and the boat being battered are actually really almost personification waves. Like the waves and the wind were out to get them. They were being attacked. They were being just assaulted by the waves, right? Not normal language that we use about waves. The waves were really almost personified as an enemy here, coming to get them, and the wind. And Jesus, kind of spending all night in prayer, sees them from the mountaintop, apparently. I'm not exactly sure how this works. They're about halfway across the lake. I think the lake is something like 7 miles wide, the sea that we're talking about here. He sees them and he comes walking to them across the water, right? And this is too much for the mind to comprehend, right? So they immediately try to come up with another way of understanding this, right? It's a ghost. It's got to be a ghost, right? Because people don't walk on water, right? People don't walk on water. And of course, when we hear in the Psalms about someone who is walking on water or treading on the paths of the sea, it's always God himself, right? Walking on water is the domain of God. And they are terrified, and Jesus says these wonderful words, right? It's me. don't be afraid. And of course, the it's me here, we talked about this in Lent quite a bit. The Greek here is I am, right? It's ego eimi. It's the same as the I am statements that we get in John's Gospel, which is, of course, what God says about himself. But Peter, right, he's got some faith, but he's also kind of a doubting person. His response to Jesus' declaration, it's me, don't be afraid, is what? If it is you. You know? If it is you, command me to come out on the water. And of course, Jesus does with just one word, come. And Peter steps out onto the water. It's a profound moment of trust and faith. And Peter does it with confidence. But when he notices that it's still storming out, he becomes afraid and he begins to sink. Notice he doesn't begin to sink and get afraid. He becomes afraid and begins to sink. And I think the order is important there, because when he's focused on Jesus and he has that trust going, he steps out. But when he sees like the mess that he's in, he becomes afraid and he loses his trust. And I think that's a pretty human moment, right? We can, we can get in line for that roller coaster and we think we're going to be fine. But once we get on it, all of a sudden, the trust that we have in the ride becomes a little more shaky, and we might get afraid. I'm not a big roller coaster fan, but I'll be very blustery and confident until I get up there, and then when I'm in the thing, I'm like. But it's such a human, powerful moment, right? And we Episcopalians have our Book of Common Prayer full of these wonderful prayers that are, O everlasting God, who hast ordained and constituted the ministries of angels and so on, right? What is Peter's prayer here? Lord, save me. It is not a particularly Episcopalian prayer, but it is the prayer for the moment, right? And I think it is a lesson to us about prayer in general, right? We need the prayer for the moment, and you can be up to your neck, you can be sinking, and it is not too late to offer that prayer. And you don't have to pull out your Book of Common Prayer and find the 3-paragraph prayer that Cranmer wrote, which is so beautiful, and they are wonderful, and they have their place. But sometimes what we need to do when we find ourselves in the storm, afraid and sinking, is say, Lord, save me. Right? That is a powerful prayer and an important prayer, and one that we can all memorize very easily and keep in our back pocket, because there are plenty of times when we can use that. Right? And we have a number of those little prayers recorded in the gospel that are particularly powerful. Right? Lord, have mercy on me. Lord, save me. These are some of the best prayers that we have available to us, I think. I have said in other sermons and in other places before, the Christian writer Anne Lamott says that the 2 best prayers she knows are help me, help me, help me, and thank you, thank you, thank you. Right? These short little prayers are sometimes exactly what we need for the moment. And this image of Peter sinking and afraid, whose faith has come and gone, right? If it's you, tell me to walk. Okay, I'm walking on water. Okay, what have I done? Sinking in the mire, he calls out, Lord, save me. And of course, he gets pulled up out of that water, and they go back into the boat. And when they're back in the boat, that's when the storm becomes calm. Jesus doesn't take care of business with the calming of the storm until after Peter's back in the boat. He might have preferred it a little earlier, but things happen in whatever order they happen. And isn't that the way it is in our life too, right? Like sometimes it is we become trusting in Jesus again because he has us by the hand. We're in the midst of the rage, but we're okay again. And then we're back in the boat and things calm down, right? It doesn't always happen the way we want. But I think the lesson here in Peter's behavior is to both give ourselves a break about being people whose faith and doubt come and goes, right? We have bold Peter who says, call to me across the water, but we have doubting Peter who says, if it is you, to this Lord and Master of theirs who has just walked across the sea to come to them. If it is you, and then of course the sinking. And those of you who have visited St. Peter's Cathedral know that this is their main stained glass window, right? Over the altar is Peter sinking and Jesus lifting him up. And, the sermon is in the story, really, because what more can you say? We have all been in these stormy places. Some of us might even right now be in a stormy place of one sort or another and don't know what to do about it. We've taken our eyes off Jesus. We feel like we're sinking. As Psalm 69 says, you could look up Psalm 69. Oh Lord, the waters have risen up to my neck. Lord, save me. That is the prayer for us in this moment. And God does reach out his hand, and it doesn't always happen in the way we want it to. And the storm doesn't calm down when we want it to, but we keep our eyes there, and we pray that prayer. Lord, save me. Or maybe it's Lord, have mercy. Or maybe it's Lord, save my friend. Right? But that is the prayer for us. And that's the prayer that we're given a lesson to by Jesus and Peter today. And the disciples then make this confession. Truly you are the Son of God. We don't hear this again until, well, we do. We hear when Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah in that great moment at Caesarea Philippi. But then we hear it when the centurion looks at Jesus on the cross and says, truly this man is the Son of God. That's the moment of revelation. Jesus walking across the water and rescuing someone, and Jesus nailed to the cross, executed, doing a kind of rescue that we can only begin to grasp what it's all about. Truly, this man is the Son of God. I invite you today to think about those in peril on the sea, whatever sea of life brings you, whether it's that poor young man lost in his boat, or all sorts of folks, people fleeing difficult situations, finding themselves tossed as refugees and washed up on the shores of Europe, or trying to cross rivers in Mexico. Those in peril on the sea, they need our prayers. Right? Whatever we think about why one might come or go or do what they do, they're still in peril on the sea. And we ourselves are in peril on the sea in these times in our life when things just get out of control. And, it would be nice if we kept ourselves out of trouble and we made certain decisions that didn't cause us to find ourselves in stormy water. But that's not the way it goes, right? A lot of the times we're in troubles of our own making and up to our necks in the water before we think to pray. But that's okay. It's not too late. Lord, save me. And that hand is right there. Amen.
Amen.